Hello and welcome back to the Finish More Music podcast. So this is part 2 of our brand new series, The Creative Calling. So in part 1, we discussed this idea of the numinous, which is this ancient mystery, ineffable. It's something we can't quite put into words, but it stirs our soul. And numinous means to be beckoned to be called to. And that could be a vocation, it could be a huge part of our life, it could be something that we do as a hobby, certain books we read, films, music we listen to. There's a whole range of things that we get called to and we can't quite explain why, but it stirs our soul. And to deny these things and to deny following that which we are called to brings a heavy price. As Jung put it himself, he said that this violates the meaning of life. And I introduced this gentleman as well, James Hollis, who I learned this from. And he said that people can survive for decades, but the light has gone out. And I think that also carries with it this idea of regret and sometimes resentment that could be often unfounded towards other people. But it's really that difference between living a fulfilling, wholesome, energized, creative life and living one where the lights are out, one that's filled with negative emotions and worries and so on and so forth. So it's a really, really big deal. And in this episode, we're going to dive deeper into how following your calling, and of course, specifically with our focus being creativity, your creative calling will lead to a more enriched life for you. And it's important that we cover this and we cement this and we do the groundwork for this right now, because as you'll find out in later episodes, there are threats to this. There are things that can massively hold us back, keep us stuck, and then risk going into that lane of violating the meaning of life to us and denying our soul and creating that deep wound to our soul. So this episode's a big deal. I've done a bunch of research into this. I'm excited to unpack it with you. As a quick heads up, episode 1 was quite a long episode because we had a whole bunch of catching up to do in terms of looking back at the 3 episodes that I did previously about my journey and how all of these things link together. You can expect going forward for the next 4 episodes, them to be a little shorter and a little punchier. So excited to go on this journey with you. Let's get stuck in. Okay, so last time out when I introduced this idea of the numinous and the calling, chances are it landed with you immediately because we all know what it's like to be called to something, and we also all know what it's like to deny that and to not honour it for some reason in our life, and the loss of energy and the loss of power that we feel as a result of it. That was just the tip of the iceberg, particularly when it comes to a calling in creativity. So I want to dive into this in 2 sections. The first one is how following any calling in your life enriches your life. And then the second piece of this will focus specifically on creativity and a bunch of research that I've done into it and the reason why. So let's start with the idea of your calling. The first thing is it leads to a much more interesting life. And that makes sense, right? When we think about it, if we are called to a bunch of different things in our life and we follow those threads, they can often be new things. And that creates variety in our life. And variety is the spice of life. So it's a much more interesting life. And it's also all about engaging with our life instead of reacting to it. So a reactive life is often one that is just going through the motions. It's like we have a life that instead of it being designed by us, it's designed by other people or circumstances. And it's really easy to fall into this sort of, let's say, rhythm in life, hypnotic rhythm, where it could be go to work. If you work in an office, let's say, or on a building site or wherever, or even in your home, it can be go to work Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, whatever, get a takeout, watch a movie, Saturday is this, then it's that, then it's this, then Sunday is this, this and this. And if all of those things are lighting you up and you're calling, amazing. Oftentimes, however, we're called to doing other things, but we stay in those habits and we don't move forward. We're just simply reacting to what our life is and how it is without actually saying, hey, you know what? I'm called to trying this, to experimenting with this, to engaging in this, and then following those threads through. So a more engaged life, a more interesting life, a life where, as we've discussed, we're connecting with our soul. And I think the important piece of this is that when we are following the things that we are called to, our mind, body, and emotions are all aligned. And that's really important. And if we go back to this idea again of where being called to something is a feeling, like we get this idea that maybe comes up in our head, and then the emotion in our body says, yeah, I don't know why, I can't put this into words, but I feel this is something to explore in my life, and this is something worthy of my commitment. And in the case of creativity and writing music, it's a pretty chunky commitment, right? It's something that we do very regularly. There's things to learn, there's things to explore, there's fears to face. There's a lot of things to do that are built around creativity. And if we're called to it, it becomes a non-negotiable. It becomes worthy of our commitment to do that thing. So we sort of have this thought, and then we have the emotion. And I'm sure you can relate to this. If you think about the times where you've had the thought, oh, it would be good to do this, and then the emotion says, yes, let's do it. And then we deny it because of circumstance, because of somebody said this, somebody said that, society said the other one, shoulds, needs, musts, oughts, that potentially are all in our head. And all of a sudden our thinking is no longer aligned with our emotions, and we feel that in our body. And if we keep that going, all of a sudden that desire to do the thing can easily flip completely the other way to the resentment of not doing it, or the regret of not doing it, or just, you would of course will know that feeling, that loss of power, getting to the end of the day and once again didn't do that thing that I'm called to, or didn't explore this, or lived a life in a trance going through the motions. And the final piece of this is that it leads to a huge amount of personal growth. When all of these aspects of our life are aligned, and we discussed in the last episode that doing the things we're called to brings energy to us and to the rest of our life. If we're energized, we're doing the stuff we love, we're getting more done, and we're exploring new things, we grow as a human being. If we go through the motions, we don't. And we're either growing or we're dying. That's an important thing to explore, I think. And I've done a lot of thinking around this, and we'll cover it in a future episode. But we are either growing or we're dying. We're either feeding our soul and nourishing it, or we're causing a wound to it. So by following your callings, all of them, as many as you can, and you want to get involved with, there are different priorities. Of course, you can get quiet. It's one of the things that I do. And really spend time with it and saying, which of these is the most worthy of the most of my time, for example. And again, going forward, we'll talk about this balance in life as well, or this harmony in life. However, following these things leads to our personal growth and our development versus, of course, just going through the motions and staying in our comfort bubble. As I mentioned before, and I think this is worth doubling down on, following our calling doesn't mean things are plain sailing. It can be challenging. It might bring up a bunch of anxieties and fears and all sorts of different things, but the magic happens just outside our comfort zone, right? And that's where we grow. So you can see following the calling is really powerful, and it is the exact reverse of living a life that is dictated by our fears, our worries, the demands of other people, what we think the demands of other people are. It really is designing a life that lights you up versus having other people and circumstances design your life. Now, one of the things that's called me for quite some time is helping young people, and particularly people who are underprivileged. And so being here in the US, I thought this is a brilliant opportunity. Now we sort of did this fresh start, and I started listening to my callings, and this came up again, and it kept kind of saying to me, what could I do? How could I contribute here? And so I started to follow that thread, and I've been building out some projects and ideas with some quite brilliant organizations here in the US. And they're really all around introducing creative pursuits, in this case, a lot about writing music, but also some stuff around being an entrepreneur as well, to young people who are what's the sort of buzzwords, if you like. It's perhaps the wrong term. The terms that are used, and I'll explain them, are things like underprivileged, underserved, at-risk kids. And interestingly, when I was doing my research into this and going down the list, I was like, oh my gosh, when I was growing up, I had a tick in each one of those boxes. Like underprivileged, the other term that's used there is like economically disadvantaged. And that's absolutely how I grew up. There are people many times worse. We always had meals on the table, but my mum, absolute rock star, single parent, worked 4 jobs to make sure that those meals are on the table. I had a great life. I never even thought about this stuff until I did the research and went, oh, blimey, that's how me and a bunch of my mates grew up, you know? Underserved simply meaning, to me at least, that things aren't available to engage in and to follow. Pursuits, in this case, could be around creativity and music. And there's a whole other list of things that may not be available. The options aren't there. And then at risk is, of course, going down a path that isn't going to be, in fact, isn't going to be rewarding, but when we think of crime and drugs, I mean, it's just not going to work out well. And so all of these things were on the table, and categories that I would have been put into as I was growing up. And that got me thinking even more deeply about the impact that I might be able to have, because that's important to me. It's like, I'm going to start having these conversations unless I think I can really make a difference in people's lives. And something that really came up for me when I thought back and said, oh, okay, so these are people who are like me, potentially in a worse off position than me. What was it like growing up, and what might I be able to contribute? And one of the things that came up was this narrative that often was spun out in my family and in the people around me, which was people like us don't do things like that. There's us, and then, as my mum used to say, how the other half lives. People with money do things like this. People like us do things like this. We don't do things like them, and even to the point of resenting them, or it's even not good to be like them. And these narratives were very much spun through my early upbringing and my formative years, and the things that I've fortunately managed to break out of, because by breaking out of them, I've been able to serve more people and help more people and grow more and follow my calling. Ultimately, I said sometimes the calling's got pushback, often it does, and this was a big pushback for me. And I thought about that, and I thought, well, this is something that I can really get my teeth stuck into, because for me, it's really important for young people to have options. And if the narrative is, I must do this, or people like me only do things like that, then career options and options of pursuits that you might follow in your life all of a sudden become very, very narrow. And through being able to learn creativity and music, and I don't need to tell you this, right? If you create something, you did that. You brought something to life out of nothing. It's magical. It's incredible. And it opens up the question, well, if I could bring this to life from nothing, what else can I do from my position? What other options are available to me? If I learn entrepreneurship and taking risks and trying things and experimenting and being curious, which is a big piece of creativity, and I see the results that are possible, what are other creative people doing? What are other creatives doing in business, or living a life as a creative, building a career around music, whatever it might be? And all of a sudden, a lot of different paths open up. And to me, that's a really important and fundamentally key piece of why I'm excited to explore this and build out these different projects with these organizations. Now, the other piece of this, which of course, and let's quickly dive into one other thing that's come to mind, which is, of course, when we think about the paths that people can go down, if we are reacting to life and our environment might well lead us down a negative, destructive path. Again, these choice points and something to engage in that is positive is really important. But a big part of this was the research. And I also asked myself the question, okay, that really excites me. What else do creative pursuits bring into people's lives? Now, in this instance, I was looking through the lens of young people and economically disadvantaged people and so on. And I've got to tell you, the data's in, the science is in, this stuff is done, large scale studies, lots of it on government websites here in the US. I'm sure it will be the same in other countries as well. This wouldn't just be exclusively studied here. And get this, let me just read some of these out for you. Kids who are actively involved in the arts and in creativity are more likely to graduate high school, more likely to attend college, and importantly, finish college, more likely to achieve academic accomplishments. And these are in topics like the sciences, maths, English. So topics that we, in this instance, can be seemingly far removed away from the creative pursuit itself. But they achieve way more in academia. And these are not always small percentage gains. Some of these are huge. I think the attend college was about 25%, if memory serves me correctly, 23 to 25%, depending on the study that was done. I mean, that's ginormous, right? From being engaged in something like writing music and performing and so on and so forth. They're more likely to be involved in community service, confidence, self-esteem, self-expression, empathy, tolerance, and compassion for others all went up as well. That's absolutely huge. And you might say, well, that's great and that's really exciting that you're getting involved in this, Keith, but what does that necessarily have to do with me and creativity? Well, of course, I'm curious. So I started looking at studies for people who are older, adults, all sorts of different things, and it's mirrored and it's echoed across the board. Said another way, taking the calling benefits aside that we've talked about earlier, which in themselves are huge and the price for not doing them can be huge, at worst something like depression. If we focus purely on creativity and writing music and what it brings to your life, and is that a worthy commitment if you're called to it, it's utterly life-changing for us. So some of the other studies that came in for people who were adults discovered the benefits of creativity, and particularly if you want to turbo boost this, get involved in collaborating with others, get involved in community. When these are joined, performance, all of those things with the other aspects of your creative pursuit, your writing music and so on and so forth, they discovered improved cognitive health, physical health, and cardiovascular health, would you believe? And again, mood, empathy, energy levels all up, which led to better mental health results. So in conclusion, following your creative calling brings to you better cognitive, physical, cardio, and mental health. It brings more confidence, self-esteem, self-expression, empathy, tolerance, compassion, more likely to have out-of-the-box thinking, of course, to solve problems in your life and other people's lives, more likely to achieve in other academic areas. And this is mirrored in my experience as well. There's no question. There are constantly posts that go up in the online FMM community and messages that we receive about how people following their calling and finally being able to express themselves creatively has been life-changing for them. And people talk about the benefits in other areas of their life as a result of doing these things as well. And that's where we're going to head in the next part of this series, because I realize that this episode has been sort of very you-centric, right? It's been about, well, if I follow my creative calling and I follow the other callings in my life, these are the benefits that I get. And of course, a very apt and valuable question at this point is this me-centric? Is this selfish? How do I balance this with the other people and the commitments in my life? They demand things from me. There are things that I've said I would do, or there are things I'm employed doing. There are commitments that I've taken on. I'm a person of integrity. I'm going to follow my word. How do I also be a person of integrity to what I'm called to and honor that? And is this all selfish, or is this all from a place of service, or a little bit of both? How does that work out? So I think these are super important questions, and I'll present my thoughts, findings from my research and ideas in the next episode. So I hope you're enjoying this. Do let me know. Hit me up. I am Keith Mills on Instagram. Hit me up with a DM. I'd absolutely love to hear from you. And of course, this is a series, and then we'll be going into a slightly different rhythm with the podcast. So if this is just news for you and you're just discovering this, a really good idea is to subscribe to the podcast. And that's going to make sure that you'll get all of the episodes notified as soon as they come out, and you'll be able to follow this path that we're going down together. So I hope you enjoyed this. Take care. And until next time, happy music making.